All right, y'all, so I know the love of a shiny surface is what got us into stone cutting to begin with, but sometimes your jewelry designs call for something more edgy and contemporary. Just as you might see some painters prefer a matte finish versus a glossy one for aesthetic reasons, you can also choose to make matte cabochons to add a unique look to your cabs. And you might be thinking, why can't I just stop on my cabbing machine at like the 600 grit and call it a day? And well, sure, you probably could, but with some stones like the obsidian that I did this test piece on, you get these like weird, unsightly, like directional lines over the surface that just isn't sexy. So I'm going to show you a way to get a nice even finish on your matte cabochons when you go to do this with two different finishes to choose from. What's really great about this technique too is that you don't have to be a stone cutter and have all this fancy equipment like the Cab King back here. You can just buy your cabochons, and like most jewelers or rock lovers, you probably already have this piece of equipment around. So stay tuned and you can see how to make your cabochons matte. And as usual, I have everything that you need and the links for where to find it in the description below. First things first, you're gonna go ahead and cut and shape your cabochon, which I did off camera since I'm trying to make this short and sweet. So the stone here was brought to my 280 resin wheel, and after drying the stone like this, I see that this little dude needs a little more TLC since I can still see some scratches from the 220 diamond wheel. But once that's all done, you'll move on to the 600 resin wheel. Just as you'll most likely spend a lot of time on the 280 wheel, which at least I needed to do for my obsidian, you'll also want to spend a fair amount of time on your 600 resin to remove any final scratches from the previous wheel and perfect your dome. You can see the obvious scratches on the top here that I have yet to polish out since they kind of appear white, but I'll get to all those out before we go ahead and make these matte. Definitely use your magnification here, because if you don't get all the scratches out now and make that dome surface look as good as possible, making them matte will really accentuate any scratches or flat spots. And this is what I mean by the directional lines on your cab from the 600 wheel, at least for the obsidian here. I usually do circular motions across my cab when I'm shaping, and that leaves these small patches on the surface of this obsidian cabochon at this stage. It doesn't mean that I didn't spend enough time here, since this can be removed on the last few polishing wheels, but obsidian likes to do this at this stage for some reason. Obsidian is just really finicky. Anyways, since this isn't even the matte look we're going for, we'll move on to the mattifying process. Most of you probably already have this lying around, since the tumbler is usually the first way folks get into lapidary, and then jewelers just always have them around too. But this is one of the small Lortone tumblers that I have filled mostly with their plastic pellets. And then I'll place my single tester cabochon in here. But I think in general, tumbling process works a lot better when there's that kind of perfect amount of stones in there to really get the grit going. So maybe consider cutting a bunch of different cabochons to tet out that matte appearance on them all in one go, as long as they're about the same hardness. Now, grit choice is up to you, but if you stick around to the end, I'll show you that little comparison of the two different matte finishes so you can kind of weigh the pros and cons of each. I will then consult Lortone's handy little chart to see how much grit is needed for tumbling a load, but I honestly kind of had to wing it here since it's not like many people are out there tumbling one stone at a time. But I did about a half tablespoon here before adding water, which I estimated about as much volume as the pellets are in the tumbler. So once you seal everything up nicely, set it on your rollers and let it hang out for a week, if not 2 weeks. And this will kind of depend on what stones you use too. I know that time frame seems excessive, but I feel like just as a watch pot doesn't boil, a watch rock won't tumble, so just leave it alone. I checked this stone after a few days just because I couldn't help myself, and you can see that it is starting to become more matte, but some of the surface is still polished, so you'll need that extra time to even out the whole surface. I'd say when in doubt, let it run a little bit longer. Just make sure you set a timer on your phone or something so you don't completely forget about it. After that week or two is up, you can fish your stone out of the murky depths, wash it off, and see what it's like. This test cab was tumbled with Lortone's pre-polished grit, which they say is like a 600 grit. I see some areas that are a little uneven, so I probably could have let this go a little bit longer, but there's this elegance to the finish that can really enhance a jewelry design that has a lot of patinaed stamping or other elements. Now, to do a little side-by-side comparison, here is a fully polished piece of obsidian. And now this is kind of hard to compare because somehow I managed to pick 3 different pieces of obsidian, like they're all from different places or something. So just focus on the finish for now. The higher polish will certainly have more depth of color, as you can see with the fully polished piece, but that satin finish of the matte one is pretty romantic in my opinion. Now, the other test I did was with Lortone's 220 grit, which surprisingly looks much milder compared to when you cut a cabochon on your 280 resin wheel. And I'll be honest in that I'm not stoked about the quality of the obsidian I chose, since it has a lot of those whitish inclusions, but you can see where this would look really neat on like either a higher quality piece of obsidian, a piece of Leyland blue, or Rosarita, which are all, glass. And for more side-by-side comparisons, here is the 220 matte on the left with fully polished on the right. Once again, I used different obsidians, so the one on the left was already more transparent than the one on the right, so just look more at the finish than the coloration. And here's a comparison with the 220 matte on the left and the 600 matte on the right. I'd say out of the two, I kind of prefer the more milder matte look of 600. I think it's just a nice balance of the polished look with the matte look for a more upscale feel. To me, the 200 grit looks more like beach class, and right now that's currently not my aesthetic, but I think that might be exactly what you're looking for, so you might give it a try. One big thing to consider when making matte cabochons is the grease factor. There's just something about matte finishes that really attracts oils, especially in your fingers. So when I touched the matte cabochons with oily fingers, it would leave this kind of greasy print, like the one you'd see if you leave a French fry on a napkin. Now, it can certainly be wiped off easily with a towel, but I like to think about how or if that would be annoying for my customers. Now, I don't think the grease marks on lighter colored cabs or cabs with more patterning would be as noticeable, but that is just another thing to think about as far as if this would work for your jewelry designs. Overall, I'd say if you're interested in dabbling in matte cabochons, try like the lighter matte first, and then you can always, make it more matte if you decide to later. I think it might be just take a little bit longer to kind of reverse that process if you want to do from more matte to less matte. But overall, I'd say, I don't know, I think it could be really interesting to try some ceramic media in the tumbler too. So if you guys give that a shot, let me know in the comments how it turns out. It's so easy to become a purist when it comes to lapidary, but don't get stuck in this rut of like just polish, polish, polish until it's completely shiny, because I think you're missing out on the beauty of kind of considering other aesthetic finishes for your cabochons. Plus, with this technique, it's not like you can't go back and polish it anyways if you hate it, right? So what cabs are you considering giving a frosted finish to? Let me know in the comments, where you can also reach out if you have any other questions about this technique. So don't fear something new, just have fun with it, and happy cabbing, y'all.